All right, guys. So this was the end of the week. Hell of a week for a first week. I know I talk about the Cowboys and Eagles game, which was a lot of fun. Chiefs and Chargers game, which wasn't as fun, but still a decent game. And I'm going to talk about some of the games that were my favorites from the first week. And I'm going to talk about the first one because I'm a Jets fan, and man, we are cursed to hell. But hey, I've been seeing this for almost my whole lifetime, so it is what it is. What really surprised me was the fact that our offense actually looked better than our defense, because the Jets have always been known for having our defense carry us through many games. But this time it was the offense that put a great numbers. What surprised me the most was Justin Fields had a pretty darn good game. I know people had a lot of doubts for him during training camp, and I think he really did show that I think he still has some things to show for his career. And Aaron looked great. I know a lot of Jets fans hate him, and I get it, but he still looked pretty good. He seems to be fitting very well with the Steelers' offense. It's just wow. It almost comes to expect it at this point. We had a very big lead, and we blew it. Unfortunately, like almost seems like we always do. Brees Hall had a good game. Good running stats, but at the end of the day, special teams made that big mistake, and you can't make those kinds of mistakes in the game. Those kinds of mistakes cost you games, and I think we once again see that. And I always say I look forward to every Jets season because maybe something will happen. Maybe we'll change our luck, but I always get disappointed. So at this point, I see some good things from the team. Obviously, Aaron Glenn is our coach now, so that's a massive plus. But at the end of the day, I just need to see it because I've been let down so many times. When Aaron came to us, I was so excited, and we all know the story about that. So we'll see what happens with the Jets. But still an entertaining game, even though the finale broke my heart. The Colts Dolphins game. This one was interesting. I know a lot of people were losing their minds about the fact that Daniel Jones was going to be the starter for the season for the Colts this year, and everyone was like, "Man, the Colts are crazy for doing that." But hey, he seems to have paid off in Week 1, and he looked very impressive to me. Obviously a good O line helps that, and he had a great O line. I'm sure Andrew Luck would have loved to have that O line, but I think Daniel Jones looked really good. I know the word that they're saying there, what they're telling him right now is Indiana Jones, because he had a really good week. I know a lot of people are happy about it, and unfortunately for the Dolphins, I mean, Jesus, I mean, I've always had an because of their same division, I don't want them to do good, but Christ, I mean, Tua is I think is in question now because he had a very bad game, and when you bring in Zach Wilson to finish the game, I mean, ugh. And I've always had a level of respect for Tua, but he just doesn't stay healthy, and he does kind of. I actually don't want to say because his injuries were very serious, but he needs to learn how to slide. But at the end of the day, Colts looked great, and the Dolphins didn't, and it was very surprising for me. I remember when I was watching the scoreboard, I was like, that's not real. That's impossible. So, a very interesting game. So the Packers Lions game, Jordan Love had a great game. Goff did not have such a good of a game. And I think we kind of expected that the Lions not to be the same team that they were last year. That's why everyone was so gutted when the Commanders beat them because everyone felt like this was probably their best shot at a Super Bowl. And it seems that we were correct because it just doesn't seem the Lions are the same team that they were a year ago, from what I could tell anyway. But hey, again, like I say, it's the first week. Things can change. The NFL is incredibly hard to predict, but just to me, it seems like the Lions aren't the same team that they were. And the Packers look great. Obviously, we need to see more of them because their whole division last year seemed like they were gonna be the best division, and they all didn't even win a single playoff game. So, no, a lot of them called them frauds, and I do get it why they were called frauds. But and I think they might be feeling the Lions might be feeling the impact that Aaron Glenn had leaving for us, the Jets. So we're gonna see what happens. Maybe Dan might be called into question. Maybe that was a bad decision to do that, but we'll see what happens with that. And the Ravens Bills game. Now this This was game of the week for me. It might be game of the year for a while, yes, at least, because wow, what a game. Personally, I do have a lot of respect for both teams. They're both very great, but personally, I've always loved the Ravens because I respect them as an organization. They've had, they've drafted well. They've obviously they had their controversies, but for the most part, I have a great respect for their team and what they were able to build and the drafts that they've been able to achieve. And man, what a game! Obviously, the Ravens kind of messed it up, obviously, because the Bills came back. But what a thriller, 40-41. I mean, you can't get much more hype than that. Both Lamar and Allen had good games. Obviously, Lamar had a more different game because he ran more than Allen. Allen, of course, is a shooter, right? Um, but the Bills looked dead in the water for a lot of the game, and when they came back, I couldn't believe it. And I think this has been a problem for the Ravens for a long time. I know that they have this choking narrative, but it's usually in the playoffs, not in the regular season. So we're gonna see what happens with them. I know a lot of people have said like they're starting to have this kind of feeling that they're not gonna believe that the Ravens are real Super Bowl contenders until they actually make the Super Bowl, because they've had such great teams and for so many years now since Lamar's era, and they just haven't been able to make it in the playoffs that far. So, I mean, we always know they're a great team. They're always a contender, but I know a lot of people are starting to really doubt now whether they can actually make the Super Bowl or not until they actually make it. So, Derrick Henry had a great game. Of course, the fumble cost them, but I think he still had a monster game. He's always a monster. He's just amazing, but unfortunately, he had that very, very costly fumble. So, I mean, it is what it is, though. You can't make those kinds of mistakes, And I know a lot of people are also saying that John Harbaugh's, coaching is also big responsible for it. And, he's been the coach for the Ravens for a long time. So I know some people may be thinking of having a change to it and maybe changing to someone else, because obviously everyone's talking about Jim Harbaugh right now with what he's doing with the Chargers right now. So that's going to be very interesting. But I mean, overall, it was such a fun week. I'm just happy that football's finally back. I've been waiting for it to be back for a while. So I'm gonna just go through the rest of the games really quick. The Buccaneers against the Falcons was a really fun game. I've always considered Baker Mayfield a very underrated quarterback. What he did for the Browns in 2020 was immense when he won them their first playoff game, and his story was crazy. I've always had a level of respect for Mayfield, and I'm really happy for him that he's found a home with the Bucs. Giants Commanders, being from New York, I'm always a Jets fan, but I never hate the Giants, But I mean, what do you expect? I mean, the Commanders are had a renaissance right last year, but I think it calls into question that Daniel Jones goes to a different team with the Colts and he succeeds, and he didn't succeed with the Giants. So it does call into question the organization and their coaches, right? I mean, I've always said before, when it doesn't matter if you have a tremendous quarterback, if they don't protect him, any great quarterback can look horrible without an offensive line. So Bengals Browns, I mean, Jesus, it was 17-16. I mean, it's an interesting game, right? Joe Flacco in the year of our Lord 2025 is still playing, right? And he almost won the game, even though he had 2 interceptions. But Burrow had he didn't have a great game, but he didn't have any turnovers, right? But what surprised me was Bengals defense was the one that really won the game this time. Obviously, we all know the fiasco last year where it felt like Joe Burrow on the offense had to basically outscore every single team in every single game, which is why he had that amazing season. But it seemed like this time the Bengals defense had a very good game. So that was very interesting to see. The Browns are, the Browns. And, I always wanted the Browns to succeed until they got Deshaun Watson. And at that point, I was like, they're just doing it to themselves at this point. I felt like once they had Baker, they didn't need to search for another quarterback anymore. But it just didn't turn out. And, the Browns are always, it feels like the Browns are always going to be Browns, just like the Jets, to be honest with you. So, it is what it is. A very close game. And what else we have here? We had the the Panthers Jaguars game. Jaguars look pretty good, and again the Panthers are, well, they've been in the mud for a while. Young didn't have that great of a game, unfortunately, 2 interceptions, but It's not like Trevor Lawrence had a tremendous game, but he still did put enough to pull out the win. Their defense did. Jaguars defense did pretty good. I know a lot of people have been hitting on Trevor Lawrence for honestly good reason, but we'll see what happens with that. When you have two, in my opinion, when you have two bad teams going against each other, it's kind of hard to judge them accordingly until they go up into a more valid team. But still an interesting game, and I'm really looking forward to for next week. Obviously, tomorrow we have the Commanders versus the Packers, which personally I think I'm not 100% sure who's going to win. They're both very good teams, but I have a lot of respect for Jalen Daniels. That kid is just amazing, and personally, I prefer for the Commanders to win. But either one, I wouldn't be surprised if they win because they're both very good teams with very young quarterbacks. So that's gonna be a fun game, and the Vikings Bears game on Monday was very interesting. It's kind of similar thing with the Ravens and Bills, except not as fun of a game. But I was thinking about before the season that the Bears could do something, but they were looking pretty good for most of the game, and so the Vikings came back, and the Vikings have the young kid McCarthy who played a pretty decent game for rookie. Obviously, he had the interception, but for the most part, he looked pretty decent out there. And Williams had a great game, rushing and using his legs and his arms. He had a very good game. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out. And I always say when it comes down to crunch time, what your top players do is eventually what's going to affect whether you win the game or not, right? So at the end of the day, the Vikings pulled out the win, but it was still a pretty entertaining game. Texans Rams. Well, this was probably for me personally the more boring games, but Stafford had a good game, good amount of yards and a touchdown. Stroud didn't have that good of a game, 188 yards and an interception, but very low scoring game. The Rams still have one of the best coaches the best coach in the league in Sean McVay, but talent, right? But still, for me it was not that fun of a game, but it is what it is. Titans Broncos is looking pretty good this year. I know they've gone through a lot of stuff in the past 10 years, but they're looking pretty decent this year. This kid Nix is looking unfortunately, he had those 2 interceptions, but he could still do something, right? And Ward didn't have any touchdowns or interceptions. Only had 112 yards, but still a decent game. And the 49ers versus Seahawks, which was a very interesting game because 49ers were losing, and Purdy's injured, a lot of them injured. It feels like it's the same old story with the 49ers. They've always had such stacked teams, and then half of their roster gets injured midway through the season. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. I've always had a level of respect for them for being able to create such monstrous teams until they get Shanahan-itis in the Super Bowl. But I mean, it seems like they had that curse early this season. So, the Seahawks have Darnold now. Obviously Darnold played for the Jets. I always have a soft spot for Darnold, and he had a great season last year, at least in the regular season, right? And in the postseason, he kind of screwed the pooch, but but they didn't get the win. It's not like Darnold played horribly, but he didn't play that great either. It's just crazy to me with the 49ers and how they always get injured. It's just wild to me, and I'm sure they're thinking about a lot of things right now in terms of what they're going to do. The Cardinals-Saints game, obviously we know what the Saints are right now. They've been struggling ever since Drew Brees retired, and they're probably one of, if not the least talented team in the NFL right now. But hey, it is what it is. I can't talk trash about them too much. I'm a Jets fan, right? But the Cardinals are looking good. They seem to be getting their stuff together now. Kyler Murray had a great game. 2 touchdowns. Obviously not a lot of yards, but very efficient. Only missed 8 throws. I mean, Rattler had a decent game, right? He didn't have any touchdowns, but no turnovers, and obviously threw the ball a lot, but he still had over 200 yards. But I mean, a lot of their players are getting old. You know what I mean, and that's the problem. You think about the Eagles; they're the youngest team in the league. And you see how successful they are. So we're gonna see what happens with the Saints. But overall, a really fun week one. Um, one more team I didn't talk about were the Raiders and the Patriots. Both teams that are they haven't been talked about in a while. With what happened with, to the Raiders with Josh McDaniels, that horrifying nightmare. But at the end of the day, they pulled out the win, right? I mean, I think a lot of people expect the Raiders to win, so it's nice to see when you expect the team to win and they actually win, right? Gino had a decent game. He threw over 300 yards, but only a touchdown interception. But he still looked pretty decent out there. And May also, one touchdown, one interception. The Patriots have been starting to fall into irrelevancy ever since Tom left them, and it is natural for that to happen. But, Raiders came out with the win at the end of the day. Looking to see what they're going to do. They had a period before freaking Josh McDaniels came in to see if they could have been Super Bowl contenders. But, it is what it is. They're trying to rebuild, get some things going. But yeah, those were my thoughts on week one. I thought it was a very fun week, especially with that Bills-Ravens game. That hyped me up a lot. But let me know what your thoughts were about week one. For me, I think the first game, I think the Commanders are going to win. But hey, they're both great teams. You never know. You're not really. I'm not really sure. Anything can happen in the NFL at the end of the day, right? But I thought it was a very fun week one. Let me know what you think about who's going to win the game tomorrow, and let me know what you think about the week two and the teams that are going against each other. Take care, guys.